In the rarefied world of the ultra-rich, where fortunes are measured in generations and influence bleeds across continents, prison isn't always a punishment. Sometimes, it's merely a strategic retreat, a privileged inconvenience. Imagine a place, a gilded cage tucked so far away from public view and moral scrutiny that it exists only in whispers, a sanctuary where the wealthy and powerful serve their time not in squalor and regret, but in staggering, unapologetic comfort. You won't find this place on any map, no satellite will betray its location, and no government record acknowledges its existence. There is no evidence that a luxury prison for elite families like the one in our story exists in the United States. It is a carefully constructed work of fiction, a thought experiment in the audacity of unchecked power. But in this story, Blackwood Correctional Facility was its name, and it was less a prison and more a five-star country club for convicted criminals with seven-figure legal teams. Here, sentences were treated as mere suggestions, inconvenient timelines to be waited out, and the guards, hand-picked for their deference and moral flexibility, acted more like concierges and hotel staff than agents of the state. Into this hermetically sealed world of corrupt luxury, a new inmate arrived, one who was so completely and fundamentally out of place that his very presence felt like a clerical error. He wasn't a disgraced CEO who had gambled with pensions, nor a fallen politician caught selling state secrets. He was Captain Evan Hayes of the United States Army, a decorated special operations officer from one of its most elite and clandestine units. And for the powerful, dynastic families of Blackwood, he was a walking, breathing joke. They looked at his rigid posture, the disciplined economy of his movements, and saw a broken soldier, a fallen hero whose glory had crumbled into shame. They mocked his profound quietness, misinterpreting his silence as trauma. They ridiculed his disciplined daily routine, a stark contrast to their leisurely, decadent existence. They sneered at his steadfast refusal to play by their intricate social rules, to kiss the rings of the self-appointed kings of this fabricated kingdom. But in their casual cruelty and blind arrogance, they were making a fatal, world-ending mistake. They operated under the assumption that he was trapped in there with them. It never once crossed their minds that they were the ones trapped in there with him. 447 excruciatingly long days, Captain Evan Hayes absorbed it all. He absorbed the sneers from the entitled sons of corporate titans, Marcus Sterling and Leo Davenport, who saw him as little more than a curiosity. He absorbed the condescending glares from Warden Thompson, a man whose spine had been replaced by a stack of bribe money, tucked firmly and securely in their family's deep pockets. They had all eagerly bought the officially sanctioned story, a narrative carefully crafted and disseminated to the press. A decorated officer who finally snapped under pressure, a tragic and spectacular fall from grace after a highly classified mission, codenamed Operation Shadowfall, went catastrophically bad. They laughed at him during their gourmet, chef-prepared meals, served on fine china in a dining hall that rivaled a Michelin star restaurant. They mocked his quiet dignity as they lounged by the pristine, Olympic-sized swimming pool, sipping on aged whiskey. They had absolutely no idea that every single taunt, every dismissive gesture, every carelessly boastful confession of past crimes, and every whispered, future criminal conspiracy was being meticulously catalogued. Every word they spoke was a nail in their own coffin, and they were handing him the hammer. They were the lead actors in a sprawling theatrical production they didn't even know they were starring in, and the final brutal act was about to begin. The warden, growing increasingly tired of the soldier's unbreakable, unnerving calm, decided the time had come to finally make a public example of him. He would shatter the man's spirit to entertain his patrons. He cornered the officer, intending to break him down, to humiliate him so thoroughly that he would become the cautionary tale he was meant to be. But the captain's reaction wouldn't just shock the warden. It would detonate a secret so profound and far-reaching that it would bring a multi-generational empire of unimaginable crime crashing down to the ground in a pile of dust and ruin. Blackwood Correctional Facility was a living paradox, a monument built to the insidious idea that with enough money, justice is just another commodity you can buy and sell. In this fictional world, the lines between incarceration and vacation were not just blurred, they were erased. Inmates wore designer cashmere sweaters and Italian loafers, their days structured around tennis lessons, spa treatments, and strategizing their next illegal venture from secure, soundproofed suites that would make a five-star hotel jealous. The prison was populated by men who saw federal indictments not as a moral reckoning, but as a temporary, albeit annoying, business expense. Chief among them were the Sterlings and the Davenports, two families whose fortunes were so vast, so ancient, and so deeply intertwined that they were practically American royalty. Their patriarchs had built a global empire on a foundation of ruthless business practices, corporate espionage, and political assassinations, and their sons, Marcus Sterling and Leo Davenport, were the heirs apparent. They were now serving a laughably light sentence for a financial scam that had wiped out thousands of small investors, a crime that would have sent a normal person away for the better part of their life. Marcus Sterling was the very definition of inherited arrogance. With a permanent, mocking smirk etched onto his handsome face, he walked the polished marble halls of Blackwood as if he owned the place, which, in a very real sense, he did. His family's money had built these walls and paid for the silence within them. Leo Davenport, his ever-present shadow, was weaker in character but just as cruel, a sycophant who derived his sense of self-worth from Marcus's fleeting approval. From the very moment Captain Evan Hayes arrived, clad in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that seemed to radiate poverty in their eyes, a stark, offensive contrast to their bespoke leisure wear, he became their favorite new toy. Hayes was a ghost at their perpetual party. His presence was an unwelcome reminder of a world outside their control, a world of duty, honor, and sacrifice that they held in utter contempt. He was a career soldier, a captain from the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, a detail that was deliberately leaked to the inmates to add a layer of twisted amusement to their persecution of him. Of course, there is no public record of a real Captain Hayes ever being involved in events like these. The man and the mission were ghosts. The official story, meticulously sold to the ravenous press, was that a top-secret mission, Operation Shadowfall, had gone terribly, tragically wrong, leading to a violent outburst and Hayes's subsequent disgrace and imprisonment. It was a neat little story, plausible and poignant, and just like the prison itself, completely and utterly fabricated. The mockery started as whispers, conspiratorial and venomous. "Look at the tin soldier," Marcus would say, his voice just loud enough to carry across the dining hall as Hayes passed their table. "All that training, all that crawling in the mud, and he ends up in here with the rest of us. How pathetic." Leo, ever the echo, would chime in. I heard he froze. Couldn't handle the pressure when it mattered. I guess all that no man left behind stuff is just for the movies, right? Hayes never flinched, never turned, never offered them the slightest acknowledgement. His face remained a mask of disciplined, impenetrable neutrality. He followed the prison routine with a mechanical precision that unnerved the complacent guards and infuriated the other inmates, whose lives were defined by a lack of discipline. He rose at 0500 hours, before the sun had even touched the manicured lawns. He performed a grueling workout in the yard that left others watching in exhausted disbelief. He ate his meals in complete silence, chewing each bite with methodical slowness, and spent hours in the library, poring over books on history and engineering. He moved with a quiet, unyielding purpose that the lazy, entitled elite of Blackwood couldn't possibly comprehend. His calm was a silent, infuriating insult to their core belief that every man had a price, that everyone could be broken, bought, or intimidated. Warden Thompson was a man whose moral compass hadn't just been lost. It had been sold to the highest bidder long ago. He was a willing puppet of the Sterling and Davenport families, his primary function being to ensure their incarceration was as pleasant and luxurious as possible in exchange for a very comfortable lifestyle and a future free from financial worry. He saw Hayes not as a man or a decorated veteran, but as a discordant note in his carefully orchestrated symphony of corruption, a problem that needed to be solved before it disrupted the harmony. The families wanted the soldier humbled, and Thompson was eager to please his masters. He started small, a series of petty harassments designed to chip away at Hayes's composure, assigning him extra menial duties like polishing the already gleaming floors ordering inconvenient and pointless cell searches at all hours of the night, revoking his library privileges for imagined infractions. Each time, Hayes complied without a single word of protest, his obedience more unnerving than any outburst would have been. This only frustrated the warden and his patrons more. He couldn't find a single crack in the officer's armor. The psychological games from Marcus and Leo escalated in response. One sweltering afternoon, as Hayes walked the perimeter of the manicured yard, his steady pace a silent metronome, they moved to block his path, positioning themselves as a physical and symbolic barrier. "Hey, Captain," Marcus began, his voice dripping with a fake, cloying sympathy that was more insulting than open hostility. "I was just on a video call with my father. He sends his regards. Said it's a real shame what happened on your little secret mission. Something about a senator getting caught in the crossfire, wasn't it?" Hayes stopped. His methodical walk came to a halt. For the first time since his arrival, his eyes, which usually seemed to look past everyone, focused directly on Marcus. For a fleeting second, something cold, ancient, and dangerous flickered in their depths before vanishing, replaced once more by the placid mask. Leo, emboldened by the perceived lack of reaction, stepped closer, invading Hayes's personal space. "My dad said the same thing. A real tragedy. Of course, when our families have a problem, we solve it. We don't just fall apart and get locked away." This was a carefully chosen, surgical jab. The sudden and mysterious death of a prominent U.S. senator had been loosely and speculatively connected to the fallout from Operation Shadowfall in the more conspiratorial corners of the press. The fact that their fathers were discussing it so casually hinted at something much darker, a level of knowledge and involvement that went far beyond public speculation. They were boasting. Hayes had spent his entire career fighting men who used bombs and bullets as their weapons. Here, in this gilded cage, the weapons were whispers, information, and influence. But he knew this battlefield better than they could ever possibly imagine. He wasn't here by accident. He wasn't a victim of circumstance. He was a hunter, and he had willingly walked into the lion's den, because that's where the lions lived. He simply took one step to the side, sidestepping them as if they were nothing more than a minor obstacle, and continued his walk. His pace was unchanged, his rhythm unbroken. Marcus and Leo were left standing in his wake, their faces contorted with fury and frustration. They saw his silence as weakness, his composure as fear. They couldn't have been more profoundly, catastrophically wrong. It was the calm of a master predator who knows the trap has been set, the bait has been taken, and the prey is already irrevocably caught. The methodical campaign of harassment and psychological warfare was destined to hit its crescendo during what the privileged inmates of Blackwood euphemistically called Family Day. This wasn't an event for tearful reunions or whispered reassurances through thick glass. It was a lavish, ostentatious social gala, a power play masquerading as a visit. It was the day where the true authority figures, the formidable Sterling and Davenport matriarchs, Eleanor Sterling and Beatrice Davenport, would visit to hold court. Like the rest of this tale, these women were formidable, fictional forces, the true steel hidden behind their family thrones, the architects of the empire their husbands and sons merely managed. They established their court by the crystalline poolside, sipping vintage champagne delivered by uniformed waiters while their sons preened and postured, basking in their reflected power. It was here, in this theater of decadence, that they collectively decided to finally break the stoic soldier, not for any strategic purpose, but for their own cruel amusement. Warden Thompson, ever the obedient servant, summoned Captain Hayes to the pool area, using the flimsy pretext of a supposed maintenance issue that required his immediate attention. Hayes arrived moments later, his drab-orange jumpsuit a jarring, offensive sight amidst the vibrant tableau of designer swimwear and flowing silk robes. He stood before the assembled families, his posture perfectly erect, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over the warden's shoulder, seemingly oblivious to the spectacle he was now the center of. "Captain Hayes," Eleanor Sterling called out, her voice, though elegant, carrying an unmistakable edge of command that cut cleanly across the water. "My son tells me you've been exceptionally quiet. I find that so fascinating." A man of action, a supposed warrior, reduced to total silence. Beatrice Davenport, her face a mask of feigned pity, added with a soft, venomous sigh, "It must be so terribly difficult to come from such a noble profession, only to end up here, among us. We heard about that unfortunate business with the senator. A terrible, terrible shame." The casual, almost flippant mention of a high-stakes political assassination, a crime they themselves had orchestrated and executed, a fact that would remain our fictional secret for a short while longer, was the absolute height of their unassailable arrogance. They were so powerful, so insulated from consequence, that they could allude to their own gravest sins in front of their victim, confident in their immunity. Marcus smirked, leaning back in his lounge chair like a Roman emperor. "See, Captain, even our mothers are concerned for your well-being. Maybe you should show a little gratitude for their concern." The air grew thick with anticipation. The other inmates, sycophants and hangers-on, watched with hungry eyes, eager to witness the final, crushing humiliation of the silent officer who had so thoroughly defied their social hierarchy. Warden Thompson stood beside his patrons, a smug, triumphant grin plastered on his face. This was his moment to shine, to deliver the coup de grace. "Hayes," the warden began, stepping forward to stand directly in front of the captain, his voice full of theatrical authority. "Look at you, standing there like a statue. You're a disgrace to the uniform you once wore. In my facility, you are nothing. These families," he gestured grandly to the Sterlings and Davenports, "they represent the real power in the world. They build things. You just follow orders until you break. I've read your file. I know what they say you did. You are a broken man." He leaned in, his face inches from Hayes's, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant to be the final, spirit-crushing blow. "And I'm going to make sure the rest of your time here is a living hell. You'll be scrubbing floors with a toothbrush by the time I'm done with you. Now, what do you have to say for yourself?" A dead, absolute silence fell over the entire poolside area. Everyone leaned in, holding their breath, waiting for Hayes to finally crack, to scream, to weep, to beg. He did nothing of the sort. Slowly, deliberately, his eyes lowered from their distant focus and locked onto Warden Thompson's. The neutral, placid mask was gone. It was replaced by a chillingly calm, analytical expression that made the warden's blood run cold. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, and completely devoid of any emotion, as if he were reading a weather report. "Warden Thompson," Hayes said conversationally, the sound cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "You live at 114 Willow Creek Lane. Charming house. Your mortgage, however, is paid in monthly cash installments by an offshore shell corporation named Aegean Holdings, which has a direct, documented financial line to Sterling Davenport Consolidated's black budget." The warden's triumphant smile vanished as if it had been wiped from his face. His skin went from ruddy to a pasty, sickly white. Hayes continued, his eyes drilling into the warden's, pinning him in place. "You have a daughter, Jessica. She attends a private university, one you could never afford. Her tuition, paid for in full by a merit scholarship fund, established and solely funded by that same non-existent company. Last Tuesday, at precisely 7:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you received a wire transfer of $50,000 to your personal savings account. The transfer was coded as a consulting fee. Your car, a brand-new German sedan with vanity plates, is leased by a subsidiary of a Davenport-owned real estate firm. Should I continue, or would you prefer I discuss the details of your last visit to that resort in the Cayman Islands?" The silence that followed was no longer one of anticipation. It was one of pure, unadulterated shock. Marcus and Leo sat bolt upright in their chairs, their smirks replaced by gaping-mouthed disbelief. Eleanor and Beatrice exchanged a single, sharp look of disbelief that quickly morphed into genuine alarm. The warden was utterly speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You see, Warden," Hayes went on, taking a small, deliberate step closer, forcing the terrified man to stumble back. "You think I'm the one who's trapped. You believe I am a broken man because you read a file that was written, reviewed, and planted specifically for you to read. You think I am nothing in your facility, but you've made a critical, fundamental error in your assessment. You've assumed that this facility is yours." He paused for a beat, letting the weight of his words sink in, a silence that stretched for an eternity. "You talk about my uniform and the disgrace I've brought upon it. Let me tell you about mine. This standard-issue jumpsuit you find so pathetic? The third button from the top isn't a button." He tapped the small plastic button on his chest with his index finger. "It's a wideband, encrypted satellite transmitter, linked directly to a quantum communication network." Another tap. "It's been broadcasting a live, high-fidelity audio and 4K video feed since the very moment I walked through your front gates. Every word you've said, every boast from Marcus and Leo about manipulating stock markets, every veiled threat from their mothers concerning political rivals, every hushed conversation about bribing judges. It has all been transmitted in real time to a Joint Task Force command center in Quantico, Virginia." His gaze swept over the utterly stunned faces of the families, each one a portrait of dawning horror. "You mocked my silence. But my silence was my weapon. While you were laughing at the broken soldier, I was listening to you confess to racketeering. While you were boasting about your untouchable power, I was building a case against you for corporate espionage, sanctions evasion, trafficking in state secrets, and high treason." He turned his full attention back to the trembling, weeping warden. "You wanted to know what I have to say for myself? I have nothing to say for myself. But I do have a question for you. Who do you think is going to be scrubbing the floors now?" The immediate aftermath of Hayes's earth-shattering revelation was pandemonium in slow motion. The arrogant laughter, the clinking champagne glasses, the soft murmur of privileged conversation, it all just vanished into a vacuum of disbelief. For about 10 agonizing seconds, nobody moved, frozen in a tableau of ruin. Marcus and Leo looked from the terrified, collapsing warden to the impossibly calm officer, their faces a frantic mask of confusion and dawning, gut-wrenching horror. Eleanor and Beatrice, the unflappable matriarchs who had weathered corporate takeovers and political scandals, for the very first time in their coddled lives, looked completely and utterly powerless. Warden Thompson was the first to break the spell. He stumbled backward, tripping over a lounge chair, his eyes darting wildly around as if searching for an escape that no longer existed. "This is insane," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "You're lying. It's a bluff. Guards, seize this inmate. Seize him now." But the guards, who had been watching from the periphery, hesitated. They looked at their blubbering boss, then at Captain Hayes, who stood like a steel statue amidst the chaos, and they saw power shift in the most absolute and terrifying way imaginable. Their primordial survival instincts told them to stay perfectly still. "It's over, Thompson," Hayes said, his voice cutting cleanly through the warden's panicked bluster. "The operation is live. The perimeter is already secure. No one is coming in, and no one is going out." As if on cue, a new sound filled the air, a sound utterly alien to the tranquil grounds of Blackwood, the deep, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of heavy helicopter blades, growing rapidly louder and closer. Every head, inmate and guard alike, snapped upward. 3 sleek, black military-grade helicopters were descending on the main yard, their presence a visceral symbol of overwhelming force. At the exact same moment, the main gates of Blackwood, designed to withstand a prison riot, were rammed open with a deafening boom that echoed across the entire facility. A convoy of black armored vehicles swarmed the property. Men in black tactical gear, with FBI and U.S. Marshal emblazoned in stark white letters on their vests, poured out, moving with a disciplined, lethal speed that was the polar opposite of Blackwood's lazy, endemic corruption. The resort prison became a federal war zone in under 60 seconds. Panic finally erupted. The wealthy, entitled inmates who had been watching the drama unfold scattered like frightened birds, only to be met by federal agents cutting off every possible exit, their calm, professional demeanor more terrifying than any shouted command. Through the unfolding chaos, one figure walked with an air of absolute, unquestionable command, a 4-star general in a perfectly pressed Army service uniform, his chest a constellation of ribbons. He walked directly toward the pool, his path cleared by awestruck agents, his sharp eyes landing on Captain Hayes. "Captain," the general said, his voice a gravelly baritone that resonated with authority. "Report." Hayes, in a fluid, instantaneous motion, snapped to attention, the shift from inmate back to soldier so complete it was jarring. "General Morrison, sir," he said, his voice crisp and clear. "Operation Shadowfall is complete. The targets have exposed themselves and their entire network. We have actionable, high-definition confessions and corroborating digital evidence on multiple counts, including treason and the assassination of Senator Cale. Warden Thompson is complicit and has confessed to bribery and obstruction on a live feed. The primary targets," he gestured with a subtle nod to the huddled, terrified Sterling and Davenport families, "are secure and present." General Morrison gave a single, curt nod of approval. "Excellent work, Captain. Truly excellent." He then turned his steely, unforgiving gaze on the wreckage of the family's arrogance, on Marcus and Leo, now flanked by stern-faced FBI agents, their designer clothes looking absurdly out of place, and on Eleanor and Beatrice, whose fine jewelry now seemed like cheap costume pieces. "Marcus Sterling, Leo Davenport," the general's voice boomed across the now silent pool deck. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit economic espionage and a list of financial crimes so long it will take a week to read." He then addressed the patriarchs, who were being frog-marched from their suites, caught while frantically trying to destroy evidence. "Your fathers are being taken into custody as we speak. Their global empire is being seized and dismantled for the crime of selling classified U.S. military technology to foreign adversaries." Finally, he turned to the two matriarchs, who were holding on to each other, their faces pale with shock. "Eleanor Sterling, Beatrice Davenport, you are under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and for ordering the assassination of United States Senator Patrick Cale." A collective gasp went through the assembled crowd of inmates. The dark whisper, the locker room boast, was now a public accusation, backed by the full, terrifying force of the United States government. Beatrice swayed on her feet and looked as if she might faint, but Eleanor summoned one last, pathetic shred of her lifelong arrogance. "You have no proof," she spat, her voice trembling slightly. General Morrison allowed a thin, cold, merciless smile to cross his lips. He glanced at Captain Hayes, a look of immense respect in his eyes. "Captain Hayes has been our proof for the last 47 days. Every time you mocked him, you were confessing. Every boast you made was your indictment. Your arrogance was the only witness we ever needed." He then looked at the weeping, broken Warden Thompson with an expression of utter disgust. "You sold your oath and your country for a German sedan and a beach house. I hope to God it was worth it." As FBI agents led the Sterling and Davenport families away in handcuffs, their images of power shattered forever, General Morrison walked over to Hayes. "The Secretary of Defense sends his personal commendation, Evan. No one in Washington believed this deep-cover operation could be pulled off." Hayes watched the chaos, watched the once mighty families being treated like the common criminals they had always been. "They made it easy, sir," he replied, his voice quiet again. "Their greatest weakness was their own pride. They couldn't imagine a world where they weren't in control, a reality where their money wasn't the ultimate power. That is a lesson they are about to learn in excruciating, unending detail," the general said grimly. "Welcome back, Captain. Let's get you out of that jumpsuit and into a proper uniform." The story of Captain Hayes and Operation Shadowfall is a powerful, compelling example of the quiet, unyielding strength that often hides right in plain sight, a masterclass in how unwavering discipline and razor-sharp intelligence can triumph over the loudest arrogance and the deepest corruption. If you were captivated by this story of long-awaited justice, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and have all your notifications turned on. We bring you incredible tales of underestimated heroes and deeply satisfying revenge every single week, and you won't want to miss what is coming next. The Sterling Davenport Empire didn't just fall, it imploded in a spectacular fireball of scandal and federal seizure. The news cycle was dominated for weeks by the astonishing depth of their crimes, all brought to light by the actions of a single, silent undercover officer. Their multinational corporation was seized, its assets frozen, and its divisions dismantled by federal regulators, the proceeds used to compensate their thousands of victims. Eleanor and Beatrice, stripped of their power and prestige, would spend the rest of their natural lives in a real maximum-security federal prison, a place of concrete and steel, a far cry from the poolside luxury they were so accustomed to. Marcus and Leo, stripped of their family names and vast fortune, received lengthy sentences in the kind of harsh, unforgiving penitentiaries they once thought were only for other, lesser people. As for Warden Thompson, he received a sentence that would ensure he intimately understood the true, brutal meaning of incarceration for a very long time. And Captain Evan Hayes? He was never a broken man. He was a weapon, precisely aimed and expertly deployed. Operation Shadowfall became a legendary, albeit highly classified, case study in deep cover infiltration taught at Quantico and Fort Bragg. Hayes received a quiet, unpublicized commendation in a closed-door ceremony, his honor fully restored, and he returned to his unit, ready for the next mission, a silent guardian, utterly content to serve in the shadows. It stands as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about loud boasts or flashy displays of wealth. It is about unbreakable discipline, unwavering resolve, and the courage to stand alone against a corrupt world.